What drives a married woman to betray her vows? This question haunted me as I reviewed the private investigator's findings and examined the evidence. After 15 years of a happy marriage, what could make her seek intimacy outside of our relationship? The images and details in the report only added to my confusion. Was it an error of judgment, a moment of weakness, or perhaps something deeper, such as a psychological breakdown? The report indicates that their meetings were purely physical, which raised additional questions about the nature of their relationship. Did she still love her husband, or had she just lost her way? No woman in her right mind would risk everything she has for fleeting moments of infidelity. Tears streamed down my face as I tried to make sense of it all. The private investigator left me alone in the office so that I could digest the report and deal with the emotions that overwhelmed me. After studying the photos, I was almost more concerned about the intensity with which she was having an affair with her lover. I recognized him as Chad Wilkins, a colleague from the real estate office where she worked as an agent. They met a couple of times a week at the motel on the highway and sometimes in our house in the guest bedroom. The private investigator had photos of them together, so there were no privacy issues in divorce court. When the private investigator first saw them enter our house, he installed many cameras and audio recorders in different rooms. Now I had to decide when and how to confront her. I have come to the conclusion that divorce is inevitable. I couldn't bring myself to forgive her for betraying me and expecting me to just brush it off, despite the fact that I consider myself a Christian. The footage of her infidelity showed such disrespect and lack of regard for me that I could not find a reason to ask her for forgiveness. My name is Frank Nolan. I am a 43-year-old supermarket manager. My work often takes me away from my family for long hours, so I thought this could be the reason for my wife Joan's infidelity, but I couldn't justify her cheating on me with that. We first met in college, and since our first date, no other woman has captured my heart. Throughout our marriage, I cherished her and relied on her completely. She works as an agent for a real estate firm and often spends long hours outside the office, just like Chad. It seems that such a joint schedule gives them the opportunity to pursue their additional hobbies. Chad, who is about our age, is married to Mary Damon, a delightful and kind woman. They also have 2 children about the same age as ours. I first met them at various family gatherings organized by the real estate company and always found them to be a pleasant family. I thought the divorce could be settled amicably, citing irreconcilable differences, especially if she was willing to cooperate. Since we both received the same income, I did not see the need for alimony. In addition, if our 14-year-old son Jeremy lives with me and our 12-year-old daughter Kim stays with her mother, then alimony will not be needed. It seems fair to me to sell the house and divide all the property equally, 50-50ths. If she refuses to comply, I will resort to the threat of divorce on the grounds of adultery and publish the private investigator's report with incriminating photographs, audio, and video recordings. The thought of Chad's family had crossed my mind, but I didn't have a plan yet on how to solve this problem. Perhaps at the right moment, I will share the evidence I have with his wife and let her make her own decision. I knew it would be just as devastating for her as it was for me, but she needs to know what kind of man she married. I wanted to take revenge for what he had done to my family. There was a sudden knock on the door, and the private detective entered. "How are you, Mr. Nolan? Do you have any questions about the material?" "No, I don't think so. Everything is here as I expected," I replied sadly. "Would you like to watch videos or listen to audio recordings? This may give you a better understanding of events," he suggested. "No, thanks. I can no longer accept what the photos have already shown me," I said. The realization that she had completely given herself to another man was too unbearable, so I got up and prepared to leave. When I left, I paid him by writing a check for the remaining amount. I collected his report with photos, audio, and videotapes and left his office. After lunch, I took the day off, giving the assistant manager the opportunity to take command of the market into his own hands. It was a good opportunity for him to gain experience, and I made sure to be in touch via my mobile phone if he needed me. I decided to stop in a park near our house to reflect on the events that led me to reveal the infidelity of my future ex-wife. The thought of returning to the house we once called home no longer pleased me because it no longer felt like home. It was just a simple house where we ate and rested together. I decided to do everything possible to save our family for the sake of our children, who needed stability. Joan, my wife, is a wonderful woman who keeps fit through exercise and work, although she may not be as slim as she used to be after having children. I noticed that she has lost a little weight lately and looks tired, which I assumed was due to a new diet. Despite this, she still seems beautiful to me. Our intimate life was regular until a few weeks ago. Our love life was filled with tenderness, but it lacked the sharpness of sensations. We often adhered to standard intimacy practices. I thought about offering my partner to try something new to brighten up our relationship, but I doubted because of her possible reaction to my fantasies. It took some time before I realized that our intimacy had weakened, and on reflection, I noticed that she showed no interest in intimacy with me, except on the days when she was with Chad. The rest of the time, our physical connection remained unchanged. When I came across a bank statement from her personal account showing expenses at a local hotel, I couldn't help but feel suspicious. I decided to conduct further investigation, as a result of which I hired a private investigator whose report confirmed my fears. Despite thinking about confronting her immediately, I decided to collect more evidence of her possible infidelity. The investigation was expensive, and we had to spend some of our retirement savings. I reasoned that if my suspicions were correct, I wouldn't have to worry about our future together. Her unwavering love for me did not weaken even as she continued her affair. I couldn't help but wonder at her ability to maintain such a facade and pretend that nothing was happening. It was clear to me that she was putting on a good show. Her actions with Chad indicated that she no longer felt the same love and respect for me as she did for her partner. It was a disturbing realization that I knew I couldn't ignore. Sitting in the park where we spent countless unforgettable moments with our children, emotions overwhelmed me, and tears welled up in my eyes again as I reflected on the past 15 years of what I thought was a perfect marriage. Memories of all the happy moments flashed through my mind, despite a few minor problems. How could she leave so easily? Tears were streaming down my face as I sat in the park, leaning my head against the headrest and trying to make sense of it all. I finally managed to regain my composure, but then another thought came to my mind. If she is really struggling with mental illness, will I be able to support her? In our wedding vows, there was a promise to be by each other's side in sickness and in health, and mental illness is a form of illness. Will I be able to find the strength to stay married and fulfill this vow if she ends her affair? The marriage vow also contained a promise to forsake all others, which she clearly broke. When I realized that I could no longer trust her, even if her actions were influenced by illness, I knew I could not continue to live with her. How could I manage her and combine my work responsibilities? Divorce seemed to be the only acceptable option. I started thinking about how to get through the breakup with minimal damage to our children and not get into an acute confrontation with her. But first, I had to find and consult with a divorce lawyer. I used my mobile phone to contact our lawyer and ask for advice. Jerry seemed shocked by my request, but he recommended Ron Jenkins to me and gave me his contact details. Before ending the conversation, I asked him to revise my will, excluding Joan from it and specifying our children as the main beneficiaries. After that, I immediately set up an appointment with a divorce lawyer for the next morning. Feeling depressed, I decided to return home and try to maintain a sense of normality for a while longer. When I returned home, Joan was not there yet, but our children were at home and diligently doing their homework. I felt proud watching them, seeing how they pushed themselves to complete tasks as soon as they came home from school. "Dad," Kim asked curiously, "why are you home so early?" I explained that I had some things to do, and instead of going back to the store, I decided to come home to see how they were doing. Kim jokingly replied, grinning mischievously, "Oh, Dad, you know how hardworking we are." I hugged her tightly, grateful for what a wonderful daughter she was, even though I knew I would miss her when I separated from her mother. "Of course," I teased, "has your mom returned home yet?" Kim shook her head, making it clear that her mom hadn't returned yet. She called to say that she would be a little late because she had an appointment. She mentioned that she would bring Chinese food for dinner, which seemed like a good option to me. I asked if Jeremy was in his room, and she confirmed that he was. I wondered if Joan was meeting Chad at the motel this afternoon, but I stopped following her activities since I had all the information I needed. I went upstairs and knocked on Jeremy's door. When he opened it, I hugged him and asked how things were going at school. He replied that everything was going well, without any complaints. We continued the conversation for a few more minutes before I went downstairs to make myself a scotch on the rocks, my favorite drink, while waiting for Joan. When she arrived home, I couldn't help but notice how tired and pale she looked, even a little grayish. Her recent weight loss was obvious, as her dress hung loosely on her. It seemed strange to me that she hadn't mentioned being on a diet. I watched as she brought a bag of Chinese food into the kitchen and hugged Kim, then called Jeremy to join us for dinner. She turned to me with a radiant smile that lit up her entire face. "How was my dear husband's day?" "What happened?" she asked, kissing me on the cheek. "Great," I replied, returning the kiss. "Are we a little grumpy today?" "What is it?" she asked with a note of concern on her face. "No, I'm fine, honey. I just had a busy day," I replied, trying to sound more cheerful. She gave me a curious look, as if she felt guilty, then turned and headed back to the kitchen. After finishing my whiskey, I went to the kitchen to help her set the table while Kim poured water into glasses. Despite Joan's continued affection for me, I was puzzled by her sudden desire for more intimacy, jeopardizing our marriage. An impending divorce seemed inevitable, regardless of the reasons for her infidelity. Our dinner was held in a pleasant atmosphere as Joan shared the details of a show she had stopped at. It was about a luxurious and spacious house, which promised her a solid commission. I didn't care if Joan actually attended the screening or spent time with her lover. My emotions overwhelmed me, but I tried to hide my true feelings for the sake of the children while we ate. After the meal, the children cleaned the kitchen while Joan went upstairs to change. I retired to the family room to distract myself and watch TV. The sound of the shower running made me wonder if she was trying to wash away all traces of her affair. The thought that she had given me only half of her attention that evening infuriated me and pushed me towards the idea of revenge for her betrayal. That evening, she tried to initiate intimacy, but I evaded her and turned away, pretending to be asleep. I listened to her disappointed sigh as she left. The next morning, I woke up early and left the house before everyone was awake. I left a note saying that I had an important work project that required my immediate attention and an early start. Being around Joan became difficult for me, and I needed some space to clear my head. I got to work and managed to get a few things done before going to a meeting with a divorce lawyer. I took with me the evidence collected by the private investigator. Arriving at the lawyer's office, his secretary quickly led me into his office. After introducing myself, I described in detail the desired outcome of the divorce. The lawyer reviewed the evidence and documents, agreeing that it was a compelling case that could be resolved smoothly if the other party agreed. Otherwise, the evidence would be used. Using photos and additional information would significantly increase the likelihood of her consent. I asked about the timing of the delivery of the divorce documents to her, to which he replied that it would take a couple of days to prepare, submit, and make copies. I offered to attach her photo to the documents to immediately inform her about the reason for the divorce. He agreed and assured me that he would contact me as soon as the documents were ready. With that, I went home. I had a difficult task ahead of me, to inform Jeremy and Kim about the upcoming breakup of our family. I knew this news would be a crushing blow for them because it would happen suddenly and without any warning. I couldn't have warned them in advance because Joan would have found out about it before I could hand her the divorce papers. My plan was to hand her the paperwork at the real estate office and catch her off guard by revealing her affair. I hoped that this sudden shock would make her realize the seriousness of her actions and what she could lose. Additionally, I hoped it would serve as a warning to Chad, potentially signaling that his own marriage could be in jeopardy if he were present or found out about the situation. Most of all, I worried about how to tell the children. So, I spent the day looking for a furnished apartment that could be temporarily called home. Having found one, I posted a deposit and returned home. Joan was at home cooking dinner. She greeted me with a smile and a warm kiss. I couldn't help but think that she was playing well, so I decided to play along with her and returned the kiss with some passion. I had to remind myself not to rush it, wait until tonight, and I'll give you what you want. "Mom, this is disgusting," I said. "I'm sorry, honey, Mom got a little carried away," Joan laughed. I doubted I could stand being close to her, but she might start to suspect something if I didn't respond to her advances. I had avoided her the night before, but I couldn't keep doing it 2 nights in a row without arousing suspicion. If I could, I would have to go through with it. I asked, still holding her waist. If I keep bullying you, we'll end up with burnt chicken and biscuits, she said with a playful grin, and focused on cooking. In the late afternoon, she went to bed naked, looking thinner than usual. I was about to ask about her diet when she pulled me to her and kissed me passionately, clinging to my arms. "Frank, I love you more than you'll ever know," she whispered. I couldn't get rid of the feeling of contradiction. Was she deceiving me by confessing her love? "I love you too, my dear." Accepted, charming creature, she snuggled up to me, and we fell asleep together. The next day and night were similar to the previous ones, and she stated, "You are my dearest, and I have to admit that you are the best lover I have ever known." I couldn't help but answer, "I love you, darling, but why are you so sure that I am the best lover in the world? How many others have you had intimate relationships with?" She paused for a moment before answering, and I could almost hear the gears grinding as she tried to come up with a suitable answer. "You're the only one, my dear," she said, thinking that making love couldn't be better. "Good answer," I replied quickly. "Well, tomorrow she'll understand my true feelings," I thought when I dozed off. She asked, "Frank, can we be alone on Saturday morning? I need to tell you something." I agreed, and took the children to their parents to talk to her. What the hell was she going to tell me? Does she admit her feelings? Well, it doesn't matter now, everything suits me. What's going on? I asked. I'll explain later, she said. Good. Last night, I had difficulty falling asleep thinking about what might happen tomorrow and how I would deal with it. I couldn't help but think about how she would take her confession. She'll probably blame me. After all, I was a great partner and she loved me, so how could I be to blame for this? The next morning, I got up early and went to the IHOP for breakfast. I made a firm decision to end my relationship with her, not wanting to see or talk to her anymore. The divorce process was in full swing, which I learned from the lawyers when I called them from work. They informed me that the documents had been submitted the day before and were ready to be sent. I scheduled their delivery to Joan at 3 o'clock in the afternoon so that I would have time to prepare for the upcoming process. I decided to take the day off, instructing my secretary to tell my wife that I was away on business. If she called by the time I got home, Joan had already left for work, and the kids were at school. After changing into work clothes, I left the house and rented a small truck from the U-Haul company to move. When I got home, I started loading my personal belongings into the truck, clothes, a computer, and even my favorite chair. When I was about to go to my new apartment, a neighbor came up to me as I was getting into the cab. "Frank, are you moving?" "What happened?" "Is everything okay?" she asked. I replied, "Yes, just me." Then she asked, "Is everything okay? Do you have any problems?" Joan has discovered new interests, so I think it's time to move on. It's sad, but I doubt Joan will do anything to hurt your marriage. You can discuss this with her when she gets home tonight. I'm not staying. "Goodbye, Alice," I said as I drove away. I noticed that she was looking after me with a confused expression on her face. I knew that by the end of the day, most of the neighbors would hear rumors that Joan had been unfaithful and I had left her. Alice was known as the gossip girl next door. After unloading the truck at my apartment, I returned it and got into the car. Back at the apartment, I quickly put my things away, took a shower, and changed into fresh clothes. After lunch, I went to our bank where I transferred half of the funds from our home account to my personal one. Then, I spent a couple of hours dealing with insurance issues and other administrative tasks that required my attention. By 2:30 p.m., I drove up to the high school where my children studied and waited until they were dismissed. After a few minutes, they joined me, and we went home together. Confused, they asked, "Why are you taking us, Dad? What's going on?" Kim asked. "I'll explain now, honey," I replied, and drove the car into the park next to our house and parked. Kim was sitting in the front seat next to me, and Jeremy was in the back, and both looked puzzled. Taking a deep breath, I turned to them and began, "It's hard for me to say this, but I left your mother. You will stay with her while we resolve the custody issue, but I now have my own apartment, and I will no longer live at home." "Why, Dad?" Kim started crying, tears streaming down her face. "Why can't you be with us anymore?" Jeremy whispered softly, turning away to hide his tears from us. I am very sorry, and although I cannot explain it, please know that we both love you and will always be by your side. You have to be strong for your mother and support her, but our marriage is beyond repair. We will remain your parents, but not as a couple, I said. Kim burst into open tears, and I instinctively reached out to hug her through the console. It hurt me to see my daughter crying. I couldn't understand why Joan would do this to us. It was painful to see how it affected our children. Eventually, a sense of normalcy returned to them, and I took them to the house that had once been our home. Before I left them there, I hugged them tightly. Tears were still flowing from their eyes and from mine. Go inside, do your homework, and try not to be distracted by anything, I told them. Your mom will be back soon, and she may not be in the best mood. Be there to support her. If you need anything, you can contact me by mobile phone. I left this situation and returned to my apartment. Glancing at my watch, I noticed that it was already 3 o'clock in the afternoon. At that moment, Joan should have received the sad news. Later that day, around 5 o'clock in the evening, my phone rang. When I saw the relative's number on the caller ID, I hesitantly answered, "Hello?" Frank, my father-in-law Sam, greeted me. "Hi, Sam. Can I help you?" I've always had a good relationship with Sam, Frank. Joan is in the hospital. In the hospital? Yes, she was brought home from work. She fainted after receiving the divorce papers. She asked me to call you. What's going on, Frank? Sam asked. She cheated on me, and I have proof, I said. Oh no, are you sure? It's not like her, Sam replied. I have a private investigator's report, photos, videos, all the information is in the text and audio recordings. Oh no, this news will devastate her mother. How is Joan holding up? Sam asked. She's been through a lot, but I've learned something else. She's not going to die. The word she's dying hit me like a ton of bricks. Before I asked for more details, what do you mean she's dying? She has pancreatic cancer, and it is not treatable. They say she has only a few weeks to live, Sam said. Oh my God, I had no idea, Sam. She never told me about it. How long has she known about her condition? She is heavily sedated, but she managed to say that she has been ill for about 3 months. She's very upset. Can you come to the hospital? I think she wants to see you, Sam said. My thoughts were confused. Is Joan dying? What should I do? I have already informed the children that I am leaving her, children. Oh no, they're home alone, I said. I'll come as soon as I can, but I need to check on the kids. They're home alone. Where are you? Sam asked. I'm in my apartment. Did you plan everything? Yes, I wanted to hurt her the same way she hurt me. I felt deep love and trust for this woman. There is no excuse for breaking the oath we took before God. I can understand that. I need to go to the house. Do you know how long they will keep her there? They plan to keep her overnight to keep an eye on her. Is it okay if I bring the kids later? It's probably better that they stay away for now. She's going home tomorrow and needs to be in the best condition to handle the situation. Will you be able to come here tonight? This situation is a complete disaster. I'm at a loss what to do next. I will stay with the children today and let her know that we will talk tomorrow. I'll make sure the kids go to school and then I'll stop by her place. Okay, Frank, I'll pass on your message. We'll wait here until she falls asleep, Sam said. After I hung up, I got in the car and drove back to the house. While I was driving, my phone rang. It was Kim calling from her cell phone. Hi, Kim, I answered. Daddy, Mom's not home yet. Everything is fine, Kim said. I'm on my way home now, dear. I'll explain everything when I get there. It will only take a few minutes, okay? Bye. Please God, let everything be okay. What should I tell the children? The situation was chaotic. Why didn't she tell me about her terminal illness? Perhaps that was the reason for her betrayal. It must have started after she was diagnosed. No wonder she lost weight and felt tired all the time. When I arrived at the house, Kim rushed to meet me, and Jeremy stood in the doorway and watched what was happening. Dad, Where's Mom?" Kim asked. "She's in the hospital, honey. She fainted, and they're doing some tests," I explained. "Grandpa Sam called and informed us that Mom is feeling well, so don't worry. We will see her tomorrow when she returns home, as she was left overnight for observation." I took Kim's hand as we entered the house and put my hand on Jeremy's shoulder to comfort him, which he seemed to appreciate. I suggested going out to eat, and after enjoying dinner at our favorite pizzeria, we returned home. I called Sam to find out about Joan's condition, and he informed me that she was resting peacefully and they would be going home soon. I confirmed to him that I would come in the morning to bring her home, as we had important things to discuss. He agreed with me. Before the children went to bed, Jeremy asked, "Dad, will you come home?" I paused before answering, "Looks like you're going to have to, son. You're going to school tomorrow, and then I'll probably bring your mom home. We can have a family conversation tomorrow night, okay?" "That's great," Jeremy replied. Kim, who overheard, asked, "Do you still love Mom, Dad?" I assured her, "I've always loved your mom, honey. I had to leave because something in me couldn't stay here anymore, but I might have to come back to help your mom a little," I explained. My answer made her smile, and she confirmed my intention to return home. Hugging both of them, they retired to their rooms. Left alone, I poured myself a drink and sat in front of the TV, staring at the blank screen. It was clear that I needed to go home. If she is really sick, she will not be able to cope with the house and children on her own. We will need to discuss the accommodation conditions before the children return home tomorrow. I could only assume that her affair had something to do with the news of her shortened life expectancy. Maybe I'll finally find out the reason for all this. There were many tasks to be solved. For example, to stop the divorce process. It would seem pointless to continue the divorce when she is facing an incurable disease. Besides, I would have to give up my apartment. Why didn't she tell me about her condition? If she had told me, maybe we would have found a way to overcome this together. Thinking about the 15 years of our life together and the possibility of losing her filled me with overwhelming sadness. Either because of the alcohol or because of the seriousness of the situation, I was overwhelmed by a wave of grief. The day was filled with stress, and this sudden realization turned out to be too strong, causing tears to flow down my face. Seeking revenge, I acted without communication and confrontation. Now I needed to take the time to figure out why. If she really only had a few weeks to live, we had no choice but to face it together. Although my wife's act ruined our wedding vows, I couldn't bring myself to kick her out. Despite this betrayal, I still felt a sense of duty as a person and a parent. I woke up early the next morning to get the kids ready for school. Kim was looking forward to meeting her mom after school. "Dad, did you hear anything about Mom this morning?" she asked. "I didn't have a chance to call her, dear. I'm sure if there were any problems, they would have informed us," I reassured her. "Do you have everything you need for school?" "Yes, everything is in my backpack," Kim replied. "Okay, then," I said, trying to make the children feel normal despite the turmoil in our marriage. "Let's start moving out. The bus will arrive in a few minutes. Are you ready, Jeremy?" "Yes, everything is ready," Jeremy replied. "Okay, I'll see you later." "Have a nice day," I said. When they left, I stood on the porch and watched the bus pull up, and then returned to the house. Before picking up Joan, I needed to return my things home, so I contacted the truck rental office to book that very truck. I was assured that it would be ready for my arrival. Then, I called the hospital and asked where Joan's room was. She was having breakfast when I called, but as soon as she heard my voice, tears started streaming down her face. "Oh, Frank, I'm so sorry. Can we talk?" she asked. "What is it?" I asked. "I'll pick you up around noon, Joan. I have some business to settle first, but as soon as we get home, we can talk," I reassured her. "Are you sure they'll let you go?" I asked. "Oh yeah, the doctor came and said I could go home this morning." "It just hurts," she replied. "Leave it until we get home, Joan." "I'll see you soon," I said softly. "Okay," she whispered back in a thin, whiny voice. After getting dressed for work, I went to U-Haul to pick up the truck. It took only about 2 hours to transport my things home. After that, I took a shower, changed my clothes, and returned the truck to the U-Haul. Then, I picked up the car and drove to the hospital where Joan was waiting for me. She was dressed and sitting in a wheelchair in the hall with her parents nearby. When I saw her, I was amazed at how much she had aged since I last saw her yesterday morning. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, and her complexion was almost gray-yellow. Despite her suffering, I resisted the urge to pick her up. "Are you ready to go?" I asked, trying to speak softly. "Yes, I was released quite recently." "I've been waiting for you," she sobbed. "Then let's go," I said, not wanting her to make a scene in the hospital lobby. "Let's go home," Sam interjected. "She's our daughter, but she's also your wife. If your marriage is over, we would like her to come back to us." "I understand what you're getting at, Sam, and I recognize my responsibilities as a husband, even if your daughter violated our prenuptial agreement. We can discuss this further when we get home, and I'll keep you posted, okay? Frank, please go get your car. I'll pick it up when you get back." "Thank you," I said quickly and hurried after the car. On the way home, Joan started talking. "Frank, I'm really sorry. I can't tell you how sorry I am." "Joan, why don't you wait until we get home? We can talk before the children come," I suggested. "Frank, are you going to kick me out?" she asked. "No, if you're really as sick as your father claims, we'll stick together. I know this situation is going to be difficult for Jeremy and Kim. I have already informed them that we are breaking up, but I did not disclose the reason. I rented an apartment and moved out yesterday but returned home this morning. The main question I have for you is why? Why did you do what you did, and why did you treat Chad like you never treated me? I think I deserve an explanation, and I expect you to give it when we get home. I hired a private investigator, and now I have a detailed report with photos, videos, and audio recordings of your meeting with Chad in our guest room. Any denial on your part will be useless." Joan continued to sob silently in the passenger seat as we drove home. "Okay, Frank, I'll explain everything," she finally said. We drove in silence, ignoring her tears until we arrived at our house. I took her inside and helped her up to our bedroom, where she asked to freshen up before our conversation. While she was busy, I made soup and sandwiches for our lunch. After lunch, we sat down at the kitchen table opposite each other, and I looked at her. "Say it, Joan. I want to hear it now, before the kids come home." "Okay. I don't know if you remember or not, but about 3 months ago, I started having stomach pains, which I mistook for indigestion or heartburn. After a couple of weeks, when the pain did not stop and I could not ease them off with antacids, I turned to our family doctor, and he sent me for tests and a CT scan. I did all this without telling you because I didn't want to worry you and the children. Once again, my flexible work schedule allowed me to leave the office at odd hours, which turned out to be a blessing. After receiving several alarming results, my doctor immediately referred me to a specialist. After additional tests, the therapist told me the terrible news: I have pancreatic cancer, and treatment options are limited due to the late detection of the disease. The prognosis was gloomy, and I had only a few weeks left to live. I was planning to share this heartbreaking news with you, Jeremy, and Kim this Saturday. The realization that I was leaving my loved ones hit me hard, and I didn't know how to break the news to you and the children. I couldn't stop thinking about how young I was and didn't have time to really experience life. In those moments when you weren't around, I found myself visiting sites with prohibited materials on my computer and doing things that turned me on. I longed to explore these desires, but I did not dare to share them with you for fear of losing your respect. I desperately wanted you to remember me as pure and innocent and not as a person with dark desires. I found myself in a difficult situation. My reasoning was confused by the realization that time was slipping away. I longed to fulfill my fantasies before it was too late. I should have discussed this with you, but I hesitated because I didn't want to look like just a naughty woman in your eyes. I knew Chad was interested in such things because I overheard him talking to colleagues in the office. In the end, I plucked up the courage and asked him about it, and he admitted that he had a collection of videos of the category for adults. One day, we went to his house and watched several of them together. The video turned me on so much that, in the end, we entered into an intimate relationship. But it did not meet my expectations and did not bring the satisfaction that I usually feel with you. I kept hoping that everything would get better and even allowed us to have intimate relations in our guest room several times. As you know, I made sure that he never ended up in our bed. But the last time we had intimacy in the guest room, I tried to recreate the passion depicted in the video, but I couldn't really enjoy it. It became clear to me that the situation would not change for the better, and I decided to break off my relationship with him. I admit that my actions were selfish, and I didn't think about how it would affect you and our children. I have no excuse for my actions except that after learning about my terminal diagnosis and that I didn't have long to live, I was overwhelmed with fear and selfishness. Now I deeply regret my behavior and humbly ask for the opportunity to return home and spend the rest of my time with my family. I realize that I may never be able to fully redeem myself, and I don't expect forgiveness. I hope that in time, you will find the strength in your heart to forgive me. I understand that my actions have tarnished the respect you once had for me, and I sincerely regret it. I hope that by starting to write a novel, I would be able to realize my fantasies, keeping them secret, knowing that if you find out, you will take the actions that you have taken. Now I am ready to accept any punishment that you deem necessary because I need to cleanse my soul of the sins that I have committed. You are the one I love and respect more than anyone in the world, and I am looking for your punishment for absolution." When she finished speaking, I sat in silence for a few moments, looking at her. She lowered her head and stared at the table, waiting for my answer. After listening to her confession, I carefully considered my answer. "Joan, I must admit that I am deeply hurt by your actions. It pains me to realize that you didn't come to me first and decided to cut us out of your life. Although I understand the shock of realizing that you have very little time left, I cannot understand why you felt it necessary to distance yourself from me. I would support you in everything, regardless of whether I agree with your choice. My love for you knows no bounds, and I will be by your side in everything. After becoming your husband, we tied the knot, and love became the bond that connected us into one whole. Now I understand that I should have supported you in fulfilling your desires. It's almost comical to think that I was holding back my desires for fear of being rejected and losing your respect. It turns out that we had the same desires, but the lack of communication led us astray. It's all in the past now, and I want you to stay with us as long as possible. It's hard for me to forgive you for the terrible mistake you made, but now I understand better why you did it. Perhaps this understanding will help me come to terms with what happened. It might be better for you to sleep in the guest room for a while until everything settles down. I may have to hire someone to help with the housework, washing, cooking, and cleaning. In the future, we may have to convert the dining room into a bedroom if you can no longer climb the stairs, but we can discuss this later." "Thanks, Frank," Joan said softly. I informed them that after they return from school, we will have a family meeting where we will discuss everything. Her expression turned grim again when she thought about our children. "It's necessary, I suppose. They're already at the age where they need to know, but it's not going to be easy, especially for Kim," she admitted, holding my hand tightly. I didn't let her go. The conversation with the children took place shortly after they returned home from school. Kim showed her delight at her mother's return, and Jeremy was more restrained but seemed glad to see her again. They both asked if we were still offended by each other and if we had reconciled forever. We assured them that Mom had returned home for permanent residence, but there were still problems in our relationship that needed to be resolved. Mom will be staying in the guest room for a while. I promised them that we would solve our problems soon, and they seemed satisfied with that. I had to have an uncomfortable family discussion, which was necessary to move forward. "We still have some changes to make," I told them. "Your mom won't be coming back to work anymore. She will stay at home, and we will all have to support her as much as possible. We'll hire someone to help while I'm at work and you're at school, so she won't be left alone." Kim, confused at first, spoke first. "Are you feeling unwell, Mom?" Joan, who was sitting next to Kim, put her arm around her daughter's shoulders. "Yes, honey, and it's only going to get worse." Kim's eyes widened as she took in the news her mother had just shared. "What's wrong, Mom?" "It's cancer, baby, and there's no cure for it," Joan replied. "Aren't you going to get better?" Understanding appeared on Kim's face, and I heard Jeremy curse softly under his breath. Tears glistened in Kim's eyes and began to flow down her cheeks. "Are you going to die, Mom?" "Yes, baby, I'm going to," Joan replied. "We will all face death someday, and my time will come sooner than expected." God is calling me home to be with him." Kim turned, buried her face in Joan's shoulder, and wrapped her arms around her, bursting into tears. "I don't want you to leave. You can't leave. I won't allow it." Joan hugged Kim tightly, and I turned to Jeremy. Tears streamed down his face as I held him close. "What happened to her?" he managed to say. "Cancer. Stage 4 cancer," I replied quietly. "The doctors can't do anything." For the next hour, we all cried and prayed together, but eventually came to a reluctant agreement. Kim, in denial, refused to believe that her mother's time was limited. I knew she would need the strong support of another woman in the family when Joan was no longer with us. Trying to give our family at least some sense of normality, I decided to order pizza with delivery. Kim clung to her mother, tears streaming down her face, and Joan tried to comfort her while we waited for the pizza to arrive. I was struck by Joan's strength in the face of such sadness and the confidence that she would always be there for her children. Tears welled up in my eyes too. After a few days, we began to come to terms with the situation. We reached out to our parents, brothers, and sisters who came together to support us during this difficult time. Joan's mom, Marge, moved in with us and quickly took over all the housework. Joan kindly gave her mother her guest room, and I fully supported this decision. I missed her in her bed and realized that keeping her in the guest room was just petty revenge on a woman who was already suffering. Marge's first night with us was filled with tears and emotions and culminated in a touching moment of reconciliation when Joan was on her knees expressing her love for me and asking for forgiveness. I couldn't resist anymore and hugged her cordially. We didn't exchange a word that evening. Instead, she just snuggled up to me and fell asleep. Joan continued to struggle for another month, but eventually, she was drugged so badly that she slipped away from us without making a sound. I was by her side and squeezed her hand when she left this world. Despite knowing about the inevitability of her death, the pain of loss persisted for a long time. Fortunately, Marge stayed with us for some time after the funeral, providing much-needed support. In the end, she had to return home to take care of Sam. To ease the burden, I decided to hire a housekeeper to handle the evening meal and cleaning. My children and I learned how to do laundry, and now we could do it on our own. The night before she died, she hugged me and whispered, "I've always wanted to leave before you." I was puzzled by her words. She continued, "You can go on living without me, but I can't imagine life without you. Find yourself another wife after I leave. Kim needs a woman she can trust and guide her, and you'll need a companion too. I haven't started dating yet. I'm not sure when I'll start, and I'm still wondering if it's worth disturbing Chad's happy home." Story 2. I'll make him sweat a little more. We need to have a serious conversation. An unexpected ambush occurred on Sunday evening when we were getting ready for bed. This was not surprising considering that Jeanette, my wife, had been acting strangely all weekend. I asked her several times if she was ill, but she insisted that everything was fine. Of course, I felt that something was weighing on her, and to tell the truth, I also had my own concerns. The Great Recession had a negative impact on our careers, as a result of which we turned from people with a comfortable financial situation into people barely making ends meet. It doesn't look like any of our colleagues were doing any better, but Jeanette had a harder time coming to terms with our financial failures. Growing up in a wealthy family, she was used to the luxuries we could afford, including an annual vacation. Although she never blamed me directly, I could sense her displeasure in the comments she made about our finances. I hugged Jeanette and expressed my love for her, but she didn't reciprocate. Instead, she did something completely out of character for her. She got up and poured herself a glass of strong whiskey without offering me any. It was obvious that she needed to share something important and disturbing with me, and she was gathering the courage to do so. After dinner, we watched TV, but I couldn't concentrate on the programs. My thoughts were consumed with concern for my wife. We went upstairs without watching the news, which usually meant that intimacy was waiting for us, but today it was different. Unfortunately, our personal life has become a victim of the economic crisis. As I was finishing brushing my teeth, Jeanette came into the bathroom and announced, at work, someone invited me on a ski trip to Colorado, which is paid with all expenses. One of the group members had to refuse, and the tickets are non-refundable. We're leaving on Wednesday morning, and I'll be back on Monday. I rinsed my mouth and answered, "Is someone at work?" An interesting formulation. It makes me believe that a man invited you. A look of guilt crossed Jeanette's face. I think you just answered my question. Curiosity got the better of me, and I continued, so what's the name of this man at work who invited you, a married woman, to go on vacation with him? I tried to keep my composure. You don't know him, she replied. I thought I knew everyone you work with, I declared, feeling confused. Jeanette explained, you know him, but I don't work with him directly. Now you've confused me. I didn't say someone from work, she protested. I said someone from work. I couldn't hold back my disappointment anymore. Okay, enough games. Who's the person who invited you to go on vacation? I met him in the cafeteria at work. His office is on the 5th floor, and we have already had lunch together several times. I tried my best to stay calm, but my voice filled the room when I asked, how long have you been having an affair? Jeanette began to cry, and between sobs, she managed to say, I would never cheat on you. How can you say such hurtful things? Maybe you forgot to mention that you had lunch with another man or that you became such good friends that he invited you, a married woman, to ski with him in Colorado. And we haven't had intimacy for almost a month. That's almost all. It's not what you think. He's just a really nice guy, but his girlfriend refused, and he doesn't want to lose the ticket. Everything has already been paid for, the hotel, the lift tickets. It won't cost me anything. Convenient, isn't it? So what's his name? I exclaimed. John? Does JN have a last name? Johnson or Jackson, something like that? You've upset me so much that I can't think straight. So you want to fly across the country with a man whose name you don't even know? You're either sleeping with him or you're a fool. The argument grew louder and more intense. At one point, I asked, who exactly are these friends you're going to share a room with? John's friends. There are 2 more pairs, she replied. The other 2 pairs? Does that mean you're going on a date with him? No, she continued. He doesn't want to waste a non-refundable ticket, so he asked the married woman to be his companion. Why don't you trust me? Would you believe me if I told you that I met a woman in the cafeteria and she invited me to go on vacation with her? Yes, this is. Do you remember how jealous you were when I explained the infield fly rule to the beautiful woman sitting next to us at Wrigley Field last summer? You started fighting with her, and we were kicked out of the hall. It was different. Oh, and you won't be able to ignore me when you're sharing a cabin with John and 4 complete strangers, Jeanette screamed and ran out of the room. It was a long, sleepless night. Jeanette and I tossed and turned until 2 o'clock when fatigue finally got the better of us. I got up at 6 o'clock and made coffee. She poured a cup, took a sip, threw it into the sink, and said, I'm going to work. I knew that when my wife balked, she would rather lose than admit she was wrong. She was the most stubborn person I've ever met. On the way to work, I developed a plan to save my marriage. I knew that resorting to logic would not work in this situation. A good, quick kick in the ass was needed, as my grandmother would say. About a year ago, I decided to hire a young man with street smarts who had served time in the county jail for robbing a store. He constantly reminded me that he was very much obliged to me for taking the risk of hiring an ex-convict. You tell me, boss, and I'll do it, he said. I recently decided to use this service. I went up to Julio and told him about my predicament. Julio, I need your help, I said. Tell me what you need, and consider it done, he replied. I told him the details. I need you to gather information about a man named John. I gave him a picture of my wife and the address of her office. Julio, I need you to discreetly take out John's picture, then follow him when he leaves the cafeteria and find out where he works. Julio nodded, understanding the essence of the task. Consider it done, boss, he assured me, and don't worry about the timesheet. I'll take care of it. I thanked him and anxiously began to mark the time. At 5:44 a.m., the phone rang. It was Julio. Boss, it's me. I got the photo, he informed me. They were talking, but Julio couldn't get close enough to hear their conversation. After finishing the conversation, he followed John into the elevator, where John did not seem to notice his presence. Julio got off on the same floor as John and pretended to look for the room number. John entered room 510, which was designated as belonging to Anderson Metallurgical Supplies. "Julio, you've done a great job, but we're only halfway there," I told him. "Don't worry, boss. I will continue to follow him like a shadow," he replied. I hung up the phone and quickly opened Google on my computer. Not holding out much hope, I typed in the words John and Anderson to see if any suitable names would appear. Unfortunately, there were many coincidences, but none of them matched the photo I had. Then I tried to type JCA, but also to no avail. The names were as common as dirt. Feeling a little discouraged, I decided to look for Anderson Metallurgy Supplies LLC. To my surprise, I found that they are one of the largest suppliers of powdered metals in the industry, but I didn't find any names or photos of employees on their website. I took a chance and called the number indicated, asking for John Johnson, but I was informed that there is no person with that name in the company. Embarrassed, I quickly corrected myself and asked for John Jackson, and again, there was no one with that name. Doubting that I had chosen the right company, I apologized and hung up. Frustrated by the lack of progress, at 7:05 p.m., I stared at the computer screen, desperately trying to come up with a solution to reveal the true identity of this treacherous man. Just as I was lost in thought, the phone rang again. Julio was on the other end. After our conversation ended, I slipped into the men's room unnoticed. To my surprise, guess who followed me? None other than Jackson Johnson, or so I thought. It turned out that none of these names were his real name. "Did he notice you?" I asked. "No, I was safely hidden in one of the booths. I watched him through the narrow gap between the wall and the door," Julio replied. He breathed a sigh of relief, not bothering to wash his hands as he was leaving. A man about my age came in and greeted him as Mr. Jensen. At 7:35 p.m., without saying a word, I waited until the man left and approached him. "Hey, was that John Jackson?" I asked. "No, dude, it's actually Robert Jensen. He seems like a real jerk." "I can't disagree," Julio replied. "Julio, I have to say that you have the makings of an excellent spy." "Thanks, boss." Unfortunately, I was dragged into a lengthy logistics meeting, which dragged on until the end of the working day, leaving me no time for further research. "We'll have to postpone it until tomorrow." Just as I was pulling into the garage, Julio called at 8:03 p.m. He informed me that he noticed Jensen getting out of the elevator a few minutes before 3 p.m. and followed him unnoticed through the parking lot to the subway station. The train was crowded, so I sat at the opposite end of the car, surrounded by a group of Mexicans speaking Spanish. Jensen seemed afraid to look in our direction. He sat clutching his briefcase tightly, as if we were plotting to steal it. He disembarked at Logan Square, and I watched him until he got to his house. He lives in the basement apartment of a 2-story building located about a block from the boulevard at 2366 North Kimball Avenue. At 8:31 p.m., I noticed that his apartment had burglar bars but no curtains, which allowed me to look inside. It was a complete mess. Having found nothing better, I settled down at the next ramp to see if Jensen would dare to go outside again. 10 minutes later, he appeared with a stack of pizza boxes, which he threw into the trash can. Then he reappeared with 2 large garbage bags. As soon as he returned to the house, I quickly grabbed both bags. This was a common method that my friends used to steal personal data. People casually throw away valuables. Boss, at 8:57, I could not determine who exactly Jackson Johnson was, but I came across a selection of official documents in which he was listed as Robert Jensen, Julio informed me. "Julio, you did a great job. Unfortunately, I can't continue the conversation at the moment. We'll see everything tomorrow, okay?" I said. What I found gave me an idea. I told Janine, who was enjoying a hamburger and fries at the kitchen table. "In order for us to have a rational discussion, I require a few things," I said, interrupting her attempt to speak. Once I finished speaking, she could say whatever she wanted. "I'm not a fool. I haven't forgotten how you specifically wrote an announcement about your vacation so that I would think you were traveling with a female colleague. It's time for full disclosure. I need to know John's last name, address, email address, mobile phone number, and place of work. Besides, I need copies of the plane tickets and the address of the mountain chalet he rented. If something happens to you, God forbid, I don't want to have to tell the police that I let my wife go to Colorado without knowing where she is and with whom. Don't overreact, I said as she attempted to interject. I say it first, then you do it. Always annoyed my wife when I didn't let her speak for herself. I also need the names and phone numbers of other couples. Now, you can answer, I continued. He didn't actually rent the chalet, it belongs to his uncle. Besides, John doesn't have a mobile phone, can you believe it? Nowadays even 5-year-olds have mobile phones, but he doesn't. If I collect all this information, will you stop bullying me and let me have some fun? She asked, her face brightening as she smiled. You have 1 day to provide me with everything I need. Why don't you admit that you're jealous of me because I'm going to Colorado? She exclaimed. I slammed my fist on the table. I'm not jealous. I'm furious because in all the time that we've known each other and in the 4 years that we've been married, you've never once mentioned that you were going skiing. And now, despite all the obstacles, you suddenly wanted to go skiing in Colorado with some random guy you met in the cafeteria, and you wonder why I suspect you of having an affair. I yelled. I swear it's not like that, she screamed. Give me the information. If everything is confirmed, we will talk. We slept as far apart as possible on our double mattress, but the next morning, Jeanette was surprisingly polite, and we even had coffee together. I arrived at the office early and paced the floor anxiously until Julio arrived. Jeanette was leaving tomorrow, and this was my last chance to save my marriage. Julio brought a large cardboard box to work. He sorted the packages and threw out the real garbage. There are things left that should never be thrown in the trash: financial documents, bank statements, and a certified letter from a lawyer's office. He casually tore the envelope in half, as if this could prevent identity theft. I carefully taped everything that seemed important and arranged them in some semblance of order. The first thing he did was hand me an envelope the size of a legal document, sent by registered mail to Robert Jensen. This man appeared in court for non-payment of alimony. He has 2 small children, and he has not paid alimony for more than a year. As a result, he was issued an arrest warrant for failing to appear in court. Julio explained that the police are too busy to come to his house, so they enter his name into the database. If he has at least one contact with the police, even for a minor violation such as a traffic ticket, they will arrest him. Therefore, it is necessary to arrange a meeting with the police in Chicago. Julio found this idea funny and called it a good one. Julio presented a collection of overdraft notifications and refunded checks due to lack of funds. The bank sent him several notifications before closing his account. Then, Julio showed the flight reservation and noticed that his ticket is a round trip, while his wife's ticket is only one way. This is concerning. Julio suggested canceling the tickets using the entry ID and proposed another idea. His plan is to separate Jensen and my wife on the plane by swapping their seats. Jensen's seat will be pushed back, and an empty seat will be bought for him. After examining the documents, he searched the Chicago Tribune archive and discovered that Jensen used an assumed name because he was convicted of committing a sexual offense. Despite the fact that the attack took place in Denver, Jensen is originally from Chicago, and all 3 daily newspapers published his story and sketch. Julio is sure it is him, as the victim's identity was protected due to the plea agreement. It became known that Jensen pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of sexual assault and served 24 months in prison. During his imprisonment, his wife divorced him. Julio visited the criminal registry and confirmed Jensen's address. The register also reports that due to overcrowding in the prison, he was released after serving only 14 months. After his release, Jensen searched for his ex-wife and brutally beat her, resulting in her hospitalization for almost a month. Despite his violent past, his wife considers Jensen a good man. I took a lunch break and went to the courthouse to get a copy of Jensen's divorce agreement. At 25 cents per sheet, a copy of the arrest warrant for his intimate assault was attached to the statement. I also studied the divorce application procedure at the law library and found a suitable template on the internet. They filled out a form stating adultery as grounds for divorce and attached time-stamped photos of Jensen and my wife in the cafeteria. We didn't eat or talk but spent an hour together. After that, I went to the Cook County District Court, the Domestic Relations Department, to file for divorce, armed with 3 copies of the statement, each of which was certified with an official seal and had a case number. I informed my boss that I would need a few personal days off. He, being a kind and sympathetic person, did not investigate further. When Jeanette returned home, she began to cook a normal dinner, not something hastily cooked. She seemed to be trying to cheer me up. I hugged her warmly and kissed her on the lips. Her reaction was not as enthusiastic as I had hoped, but it was better than complete indifference. Jeanette reached into her purse and handed me a folded piece of paper. "Here, I managed to get everything you asked for," she said. As I said, John Johnson doesn't have a phone, but I found out his email address. In addition, he can be found on Facebook. Do you know where he works? He was recently promoted, and he is waiting for new business cards. Strangely, he couldn't remember his employer's name, Jeanette explained. I stared at her, puzzled and slightly incredulous. I quickly took out my laptop and switched to Google Maps. After entering the address of the chalet, I ran into the first obstacle. The first blow. Not satisfied, I tried to find the chalet on the official zoning map of Denver. The second blow. I persevered, trying out various mapping programs at my disposal. "Darling," I exclaimed, "it looks like we've run into a problem." I entered the address of the chalet into 6 different mapping programs, in addition to the appraiser's webpage, and they all agreed that such an address does not exist. Johnson may have made a mistake in giving the address. I turned my attention to the question of tickets. He mentioned that we'd get them at the airport, didn't he? I asked. "No, we'll get the boarding pass at the airport," Jeanette corrected me. "Of course," I muttered, remembering our trip to Maui. Deciding to check the legality of the information provided by Johnson, I dialed the phone numbers of the other 2 couples indicated by him. To my horror, none of the numbers worked. I tried searching for their names on the internet, but I didn't get anywhere. Facebook proved equally inconclusive. "Dear, I regret to inform you that none of the information provided by Johnson, if of course, this is his real name, is true. Under no circumstances will I let you go through with this," I declared. I foolishly assumed that Jeanette would acknowledge the suspicious nature of Johnson's actions. Instead, in the blink of an eye, my dinner, still sizzling in the pan, flew across the room, hitting the wall. "It's a pity because it smelled very appetizing," I remarked. "You won't let me," she screamed, her voice filled with rage. "Who are you to dictate where I go and where I don't go? I'm your husband. Why are you being so unreasonable? All I'm doing is expressing concern about your plans to go skiing with a man who has deceived you in every way. You don't even know where you're going. He wasn't honest with you. Perhaps he is afraid that you will disrupt his plans by coming to his love nest," I calmly replied. Jeanette completely lost control of herself. Drops of saliva flew out of her mouth, driven by rage. "Stop saying that. We'll always be just friends. I'm going skiing and you can't stop me. If you want to go skiing, fine, I'm going skiing. But how can you afford it? We're broke, remember? I bought 2 cans of silver coins when I was a teenager. I was planning to use them for a trip on our 5th anniversary. Now I will cash them out and either go on vacation with my wife or pay for the services of a divorce lawyer. The choice is yours. Please stop threatening me." "I'm not threatening you. I make a sincere promise, and you know that I always keep my word. I don't understand why you don't trust me. You're a wonderful woman. Johnson was disrespectful to you by not taking into account your husband's objections to you going on vacation with him. I told you he's only taking me because the ticket is non-refundable. I will refund his ticket money, and we will have enough money left to go skiing. It's too late now, we're leaving tomorrow morning, and I have no way of contacting him. Jeanette, I'm not stupid, you will never deceive me. Any man who lets his wife do what you want is not a real man. Think about how you will explain to your parents, family, and friends why you are getting divorced. I don't need it. I told you I'd come back rested and fix everything. Please, I'm begging you, it's not too late to save our marriage. I told you I can't cancel the meeting. I promised John that I would go, but it's too late for him to look for someone else. So you will keep your promise to a proven liar to the detriment of the oath we swore before God and our loved ones? I keep telling you that nothing is going to happen, but it doesn't matter. If nothing happens, you've made your choice. You chose him over our marriage. I spent the night on the couch. I heard Jeanette crying in the bedroom. My mind contradicted my heart. The logical part of me wanted to let her suffer and enjoy her pain when the inevitable happened, while the emotional part urged me to become a knight in shining armor and save my marriage. I spent a sleepless night thinking about what I really want. In the end, I decided to compromise. I woke up before dawn. Jeanette ignored me. I angered her when I took a picture of her with my phone. "Why did you do that?" "What is it?" she asked. "So that the police have a fresh photo in case they need to identify your body," I replied. She responded with a string of obscenities. I went into the bedroom while she was packing her suitcase. "If you decide to accompany him on the plane, I won't be with you on your return. Our marriage will be annulled," I said firmly. She gave me a look full of contempt and replied, "I know you're not stupid enough to do that. It's interesting that I thought the same about you. It looks like we were both wrong." Without saying goodbye to her, I parked the car a short distance away and watched her drive away. Then I returned to the house and started shaving off my characteristic beard and mustache. After that, I put on a black suit, a white shirt, and a thin black tie, which my wife often called my funeral outfit. It seemed very appropriate because I was about to witness the demise of our marriage. To disguise myself even more, I put on sunglasses. Grabbing my briefcase and several suitcases with my belongings, I set off on a last-ditch attempt to save our relationship. When I arrived at the gate, Julio called me a few minutes past 6. He informed me that he was next to Jensen's basement apartment. "Boss, you won't believe it. They had a serious fight. Your wife offered to go to the airport by car, but he insisted on the subway as it is more economically profitable," Julio continued. "She even offered to pay for parking, but he refused, saying they would need the money for a trip to Colorado. While she was in the bathroom, I discreetly checked her wallet. I hoped she wasn't going to use our shared credit cards because I already canceled them after buying the ticket. I dreamed that I could read Jeanette's mind as she descended the stairs into the dimly lit underground maze known as the Chicago subway. The Blue Line train would undoubtedly be crowded with passengers heading to work. Julio expressed his concern, believing that a person going skiing in December should have a suitable winter coat and gloves, especially after seeing Jeanette being pushed by a noisy crowd. It seemed that Jeanette's dream vacation had already begun. The subway ride lasted a little over 30 minutes. Julio followed them into the terminal unnoticed, watching Jensen type their boarding pass. Fortunately, he didn't look at them closely enough to notice that I had changed my seat in the cabin right before buying my own ticket. Julio called again to inform them that they had reached the TSA checkpoint, and that was the end of his surveillance. "Thanks for the help, you've been incredibly helpful," I thanked Julio. On the X-ray machine, a security officer marked Jeanette's carry-on bag and asked them to step aside. "Please come this way," Sonora, a low-paid employee, told her. Soon, he began rummaging through her things in search of a corkscrew. I deftly hid it in an inner zippered pocket when I was examining her bags. To my relief, there was nothing in her luggage that could hint at anything. The TSA agent reprimanded her and confiscated the corkscrew. For my plan to succeed, the timing had to be perfect. Fortunately, I paid for early boarding. I was one of the first on board the plane and took a seat in the center. My wife, on the contrary, chose a window seat. Wanting to give her another chance, I asked her to sit next to me so I could show her something important. Fortunately, a few minutes later, a man got up from his seat by the aisle. Judging by his hairstyle, he turned out to be a young man in good physical shape, probably a college athlete. As the rows in front of us filled up, the remaining passengers tried to find a place for their carry-on bags in the overhead compartments. The commotion began when Jensen, holding his ticket in his hands, bumped into my seatmate, claiming that he was in his seat. Jeanette, who had turned away to pack her suitcase, turned around when she heard the argument. The man sitting by the aisle pointed out that Jensen's seat was further back, next to the toilets. In response, Jensen burst into obscenities about the incompetence of the airline and insisted that my seatmate move to the back seat so he could sit next to his girlfriend. Jeanette suggested that I ask the person in the middle seat to switch seats. Since Jensen didn't want to do that, she didn't immediately recognize me due to the lack of a beard and mustache, but the sunglasses helped hide my identity. By this time, the stewardess and the flight attendant arrived to sort out the situation. The flight attendant scolded Jensen and told him to take his seat so they could finish boarding the plane. She noted that the flight was crowded but offered to see if they could rearrange seats after takeoff. Jeanette finally realized that I was sitting in the center seat and turned to me, expressing her anger and humiliation. She accused me of ruining her vacation and called me names. In a moment of shock, she even declared that she hated being married to me. I felt as if my soul had been crushed. Ready to leave the plane, I grabbed my briefcase when suddenly something unexpected happened. Jensen started waving the ticket in my face, and I snatched it out of his hands without thinking. In a trembling voice, I asked Jeanette to read the name on the ticket. Confused, she looked at the piece of paper and asked who Robert Jensen was. I rushed forward and grabbed the ticket, but I didn't find anything. Disappointed, I crumpled it up and hurriedly put it in my pocket. But my actions did not go unnoticed by the flight attendant, who asked me to take my seat, ignoring the stewardess's request. Jensen attacked her, demanding to be seated next to his boyfriend. Feeling a surge of anger towards the man who called my wife his girlfriend, I was overwhelmed with emotion, and tears flowed down my face. As he closed my wife's eyes, he said that the Robert Jensen in question was her boyfriend. He revealed Robert's true identity, explaining that he was hiding his real name because of an outstanding arrest warrant for non-payment of alimony. It became obvious that Robert could afford to take my wife on vacation because he neglected his own children. I handed my wife a copy of the arrest warrant and asked her to read it. I told her that Robert had not bought a return ticket for her. I presented the itinerary indicating that her ticket was only one way. His worried wife asked him about the lack of a return ticket. Ignoring her concerns, I continued to argue with the stewardess. Then I showed my wife evidence of Robert's violent past, including photos of a badly beaten woman who spent a month in the hospital. Desperate for reassurance, my wife begged him to confirm that I was lying. Jensen was busy berating the senior flight attendant and expressing his contempt for the airline. Having decided to get to the truth, I told about my results obtained as a result of a Google search for Robert's real name, focusing on the word real. I provided my wife with numerous newspaper articles with Robert's photograph, proving the authenticity of his claims. My wife, overwhelmed with confusion, was trying to figure out the situation. Then I informed him that Robert was a registered sex offender. Overwhelmed with emotion, his wife begged him to confirm that this was not true, but Jensen was still fixated on his quarrel with the flight attendant and refused to answer. I asked my wife to call Robert by his real name, Robert Jensen, hoping that this would cause her at least some awareness or understanding. Jensen, although not the smartest criminal, finally seemed to have realized the gravity of the situation. His plans were thwarted. In a fit of rage, he screamed that he would kill me and rushed at me. Fortunately, I managed to dodge his punch, as a result of which his fist hit the stewardess. Chaos began in the narrow passage. My seatmate, who, as I later learned, was a starting quarterback at one of the famous Big Ten colleges, quickly intervened and restrained Jensen until the police arrived to handcuff him. The media glorified my passenger as a hero. As a reward, the airline upgraded my seat class to first. Jensen has learned from his own experience that assaulting a crew member is a criminal offense. Unsurprisingly, his excuse that he intended to harm his girlfriend's husband rather than the flight attendant did not arouse any sympathy from the policeman. I gave Jeanette all the evidence I had collected. I swear on my life that every word I say is true, I pleaded. Jeanette stared at the pile of documents, ignoring them. It's over, let's go home, she said, hoping for a warm hug. I spread my arms wide to hug my wife, but she ignored the invitation and stood silently, head bowed, and staring at the floor. Not a single word came out of her mouth. The situation worsened when the police escorted Jensen off the plane, and his screams echoed through the air, repeatedly mentioning my wife's name. I pleaded with Jeanette with a look, asking her to declare his statements a lie, but she turned away silently. An airline security guard informed Jeanette and me that we were being transferred to the Chicago Police Department due to our involvement in a chaotic incident before departure. I heard the stewardess inform the agent at the check-in desk that 3 seats were vacant. Grateful for such luck, I silently thanked heaven. Other passengers looked at us as we passed by and filmed the awkward scene on their mobile phones. Now, Jeanette was truly humiliated. She remained completely silent throughout her shameful walk, seemingly unaware of the scale of the situation. I felt numb too, my legs felt weak, and I had to concentrate to keep my balance as we walked. Somehow, I managed to keep my head up. I wanted to explain to everyone that I had done everything in my power. Everything went almost according to plan. I saved Jeanette, but I lost my wife in the process. The police took us to separate interrogation rooms where representatives of national security were present. Over the next hour, I provided them with all the information I had about Jensen. The detective told me to wait and left me alone with a cup of stale coffee while they contacted their colleagues in Denver. I paced back and forth restlessly, preoccupied with the question that haunted me: was my wife having an affair with Jensen, or was he trying to ruin our marriage with his false accusations? This argument raged in my mind relentlessly. Finally, the detective returned, and his words sounded heavy. "They found evidence in Colorado," he said. My wife's reaction confirmed their suspicions. The photos they showed her of a dilapidated shack in an auto parts warehouse took her breath away. It was there that Jensen and 4 of his friends planned to harm her using restraints and sedatives. The detective revealed their sinister intentions, and my wife's face lost color before she fainted. When the detective finished, he invited me to talk to my wife alone. It was clear that I needed to make a decision, and I reached for my briefcase. It contained a divorce petition, a painful reminder of the shattered trust between us. But I couldn't ignore the fact that she was in shock and on the verge of despair. No matter what, I couldn't bring myself to completely destroy her. Handing her the divorce papers would only make her more upset. The love I once felt for her had faded, but I couldn't leave her in such a vulnerable state. The detective urged me to change my mind, stressing that I had saved her life and that she needed me now more than ever. Reluctantly, I spoke up, informing her of my intention to tear up the papers if she sincerely apologized. But I remained steadfast in my decision to divorce her. The detective warned me to keep my plan a secret, and a few minutes later, my wife came into the room, her face hidden behind trembling hands. She looked fragile, like a shadow of her former self, visibly damaged from the ordeal she had just endured. She collapsed into a chair, bursting into sobs. The detective, who sounded angry and disappointed, addressed her sternly, emphasizing the seriousness of her actions. "Mrs. Mennel," he began, his voice filled with decades of experience. "In 29 years of working for the police, I have never encountered such nonsense. If anyone deserves to be heard, it's you." As his words hung in the air, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of compassion and detachment towards my wife. The road ahead would be full of difficult decisions and painful truths, but for now, all I could do was stay by her side, be a beacon of stability in her shattered world. Express gratitude to God for your husband and every beat of your heart that he gave you. You owe him for the rest of your life. When he left, the only sound was my wife's sharp intake of breath between sobs. Not a word was said, not even thanks or apologies. After waiting for about 5 minutes, I got tired of waiting for her to speak. "You betrayed our marriage for a ski trip that cost you less than $1,500. That's the price you set for our dream. How can I trust you that you won't leave me for another shiny trinket?" My mind begged her to say something, but she didn't. Tears streamed down my face as I waited for at least some kind of answer. Unable to stand it, I told her that if she had said at least one "I'm sorry," I would have torn up the divorce papers. "I can't wait any longer." I handed her a copy of the divorce decision. Jeanette screamed so loudly when she read it that the detective hurried back to the house to make sure she was okay. "I've already packed my things. Everything I left behind can be donated or thrown away." I gave her the keys to her apartment and left without looking back. The next time I saw her was in court. The court ordered us to attend consultations. I reluctantly agreed, but I had no intention of reconciling with her. During the consultation, the consultant saw how stupid my ex-wife was. As I had planned, the consultations did not help, and after 7 months, I became a free man. I didn't hear from Jeanette anymore, and I didn't want to. Jensen was charged with conspiracy and intent to harm. He is currently serving his sentence. Story 3. Greg claims that there are many ways to detect a spouse's infidelity, but my suspicions about Holly's possible infidelity arose in a more subtle way. On a particularly cold Saturday, I was assigned to put winter tires on Holly's car. When I got into her car and noticed that the heated driver's seat was installed on the third level, I turned it off before heading to the tire shop. Back at home, Holly was dressed and ready to go to the mall. She asked if I needed anything, which is usually a concern about overspending, but Holly is financially responsible and independent, so I was able to relax and watch football before she left. Holly reminded me to spend time with the kids and not be glued to the TV all day. A few hours later, Holly returned home with one bag, which seemed quite reasonable for the time she spent in the store. When she mentioned that she had left her sunglasses in the car, I went to get them and noticed that the seat heater was set to 3 on her side but only 2 on the passenger side. This detail aroused my suspicions. Back at the house, I asked Holly if she had gone shopping with anyone, and she hesitated before denying it. This confirmed my doubts. Most likely, she lied to me. I didn't continue, but the discrepancy in the seat heating settings increased my concerns. I decided to go to my cabin to be alone and think about the situation. It took about 30 minutes of solitude for me to realize that there were other signs of potential infidelity, such as Holly not sharing details of her day when she returned home from work, the neglect of our home and family, the hostility towards me over nothing. All these were alarming signs. How did I find out the familiar signs of a cheating spouse? Because I was already on the other side. My first marriage broke up because of my own infidelity, not because of my wife's infidelity. I was guilty of coming home late or sacrificing my days off in favor of other commitments. The grocery list that Carol, my first wife, gave me in the morning often slipped out of my head. I was the one who extolled minor things and got into heated arguments over them. My affair with a colleague had been going on for 4 months when Carol found out the truth. The affair began in the most ordinary way, innocent flirting, casual dinners filled with discussion of our partners and their shortcomings. Gradually, our relationship developed into an intimate one. Carol trusted me. I was a person who attached excessive importance to small things and often quarreled over them. 4 months later, Carol found out about my relationship with a colleague. Our romance began completely by accident, with harmless flirting and casual dinners during which we discussed our partners and their shortcomings. Soon, our relationship developed into a more intimate one. Carol trusted me. I would never have suspected anything if it hadn't been for the husband of my cheating girlfriend, who decided to show Carol the photos taken by his private investigator. This revelation devastated Carol. She couldn't believe that a man she trusted could betray her in such a way. As a result, despite my promise to remain faithful until the end of our days, she filed for divorce. It's hard for me to trust you right now. 2 years ago, you made a solemn vow to leave everything else in the past, and here we are, just 3 months later, I found myself alone again. I genuinely loved Carol, but my cheating was a stupid macho act that led me down a dangerous path. I convinced myself that this was just a friendship and that it wouldn't affect my relationship with Carol in any way. I was stupid, like countless other cheaters. A year after the divorce, I started a new life by moving from Atlanta to Seattle. 2 years later, I met Holly, courted her, and eventually got married. I was honest with her, but I missed the fact that I was unfaithful in my first marriage. Instead, I just said that my first wife couldn't come to terms with my immaturity at that time. It wasn't necessarily a lie, but it still hid the full truth. I didn't want to arouse any suspicion. I learned my lesson, and I wasn't going to cheat anymore. Holly and I have been happily married for 6 years now, and we have 2 beautiful children. But the temptation caught up with me again when my job required me to attend trainings every 6 months. These sessions took place over 3 days at our headquarters in Dallas, and the same group of 20 operatives attended each time. We formed strong bonds, friendships blossomed, and there were even hints of a romantic relationship in our group. Among us was Karen Bates, a stunning single woman in her 30s from an office in Cleveland, who seemed to enjoy my company during breaks and lunches. We had deep conversations and laughed. One evening during my 4th class in Dallas, Karen invited me to join a small group of 7 people for dinner. Intrigued and seeing nothing wrong with it, I accepted her invitation. The group turned out to be pleasant and full of fun. After dinner, we found ourselves in a bar with a lively dance floor and a performing band. I danced with Karen and 2 other women from the group. As the night went on, I looked at my watch and realized that it was midnight in Dallas and 10 o'clock in Seattle. Without saying goodbye to anyone, I left the bar and called Holly, my partner, on my cell phone. Holly answered sleepily after the second ring, concerned that I had disturbed her peace. I apologized for the late call, and she calmed me down and expressed her joy at hearing my voice. I told her that I went to dinner and had a few drinks with the company, but in the end, I wanted to remind her of my love. As I walked back to the hotel, I assured her that I would be safe and would return home the next day. We exchanged words about missing each other, and although I wanted to stay in touch, I understood that Holly needed a break. Understanding the responsibilities she performs at home, taking care of our children and working, I wanted her to be well rested by the time I returned. I ended the conversation by promising that I would see her soon. When I entered the hotel room, I collapsed on the bed in exhaustion. I realized how close I was to making a serious mistake. One more drink, one more dance with Karen, and we could cross a line that couldn't be undone. At that moment, I remembered the alarm bells that announced the collapse of my first marriage due to an affair. Deciding not to repeat those mistakes, I swore an oath to protect our marriage with Holly. For the next 4 years, I stayed true to my promise, resisting the temptation of Karen Bates and any other temptations that came my way. I might not have the charm of George Clooney, but I had the power to change and stay loyal, and as far as I know, Holly did the same. I went upstairs and went into the kitchen where our 2 children were. They were talking to their mother, who was cooking dinner. Having decided to get to the truth, I wanted to find out how far Holly had gone. Had she crossed the line? Did she fall in love with this man? I could feel Holly's gaze on me as I entered the room and took a beer from the refrigerator. Sitting down between the children, I joined the conversation and noticed that Holly was looking at the 3 of us with a smile. It became clear to me that she loves me. So why would she risk our family, or am I overreacting? I tried to behave as usual all weekend, even making love to her on Sunday morning before going to church. On Monday morning, I asked the boss for some personal time, and he kindly provided it without unnecessary questions. After making several calls, I made an appointment with the investigator on Monday afternoon. I found myself in the waiting room of the Sullivan Investigations, patiently waiting to meet Jack Sullivan. When the secretary announced my arrival, I entered Jake's office. He was a big man who reminded me of a TV show my father watched as a child. My father had a whole collection of videotapes with an actor with a mustache. What was his name? Frank Conrad or something like that? Jake noticed my confusion and chuckled. It was Frank Cannon, starring William Conrad. That's what you were trying to remember, right? Jake said, interrupting my train of thought. I can't read minds, but I often get the same questioning look. My wife insists that I shave off my mustache, but it amuses me more. After exchanging a few more pleasantries, we got down to business. If your story is true, it won't take more than a week. We will conduct an observation with a team of 2 people and collect the necessary evidence so that you can make an informed decision. The cost should not exceed $10,000. If you agree, Sheila must approve it, and by Wednesday, I will have 2 operatives ready for this case. The price tag of $10,000 seemed unaffordable to me, but considering the circumstances, it was a completely justified investment. I agreed, shook Jake's hand, and signed the contract on his secretary's desk. On Friday evening, I returned to the Sullivan Investigations Department with bated breath. "Greg, I have good news and bad news," he said, interrupting my thoughts. "The good news is that your wife hasn't slept with that jerk yet. By the way, this jerk's name is Derek Turner. I've seen him at Holly's work events a few times. I've never had a high opinion of this man, and it seems he had the same opinion of me. His condescending way of speaking always annoyed me. Despite my attitude towards him, I couldn't deny that he looked good and kept himself in shape. As soon as this thought occurred to me, I noticed that Jake was watching me patiently, waiting. It was obvious that this man knew how to play his cards right and was waiting for me to be ready to hear the next piece of information. I nodded, signaling him to continue. What he said next was shocking. Obviously, there was a possibility that she was planning to enter into a relationship with him in the near future. He informed me that he had asked her to go with him to a work conference in another city in 3 weeks. Although she hasn't committed herself yet, it seemed very likely. To gather more information, 2 of my operatives followed them on Wednesday and Thursday. One of them even sat next to them at the diner on Wednesday, and the other followed them on Thursday. I can assure you that none of the operatives have been found. During both days, there was no sign of affection between them, no handshakes, no kisses, no physical contact of any kind. In addition, we were able to record their conversations on both days. The operatives carried special bags equipped with parabolic microphones. I received cassettes from Jake, or rather, 2 CDs. I treated them with caution, almost as if they were poisonous. There is something else in this story. Based on what we heard on Wednesday, I followed Turner after work on Wednesday and Thursday evenings. On Wednesday, he immediately went to his home. On Thursday, he left work and met with another man in a bar. They didn't seem to care that they were in a public place. Although I couldn't hear their entire conversation, I caught enough to realize that your wife wasn't their original target. According to what I heard confirmed this morning, this other man is James Young. Turner reports to Young. It seems that one of their previous victims was Karen Johnson, and your wife became her replacement. Young asked how Turner was coping with the seduction of your wife and rebuked him when Turner mentioned her resistance. Turner believed that he would succeed when she accompanied him on an upcoming business trip. He believed that a little alcohol and dancing would help overcome her reluctance. He also confirmed what we heard on one of the tapes during the lunch break, that Turner seduced your wife with the promise of a future promotion if she participated in their program. Jake gave me a few more seconds to absorb all this information. He offered me a cup of coffee from the coffee pot on his desk, but I declined because I was already feeling agitated. Jake expressed his contempt for such people, and I immediately documented their conversation. This conversation took place in a public place, which means that it did not imply confidentiality. My records could potentially be used as evidence in a civil lawsuit against both parties and their company if necessary. I am ready to testify in court and provide the minutes of the court session. I am ready to take a reduced fee to ensure that these individuals are held accountable. The running costs are almost half of my initial estimate. If you need to keep an eye on your wife this weekend, then most likely it will take the rest of your deposit. Although I didn't think about it for long, I decided to listen to the recording of the conversation instead. If what you have told me is true, then perhaps we can resolve the situation without further complications. I'll talk to my wife tomorrow. There is no need to prolong this conversation. I think she will agree to a consultation that will help resolve this issue. I also need to think about a possible lawsuit. At this point, I'm inclined to support the idea that these two should be punished. Jake shook my hand and wished me luck. He offered to help me if I needed anything else, just in case. We will conclude an agreement next week. I left work early and listened to the audio files on my computer. It became obvious that Derek Turner spent most of both dinners trying to seduce Holly. He even hinted that I might have been unfaithful when I attended a training session in Dallas. I was relieved to hear Holly defend me when Turner spoke ill of me. Turner persistently tried to convince Holly that it would be useful for her career to attend the next conference with him. He said that he would be promoted soon, and if that happened, then Holly would have a great chance to take his place. He praised Holly's looks, intelligence, and abilities. He even offered to meet with her in a more private setting to find out if their relationship went beyond friendship. Holly interrupted him, saying it was time to get back to the office. That was the end of Thursday's recording. I felt that Holly was resisting but at the same time succumbing to temptation. This was understandable, considering that I had already encountered similar situations in the past. If someone had intervened before my previous affair, my first marriage might have been saved. Now it was extremely important to step in and save my current marriage. I contacted Holly's parents to see if they could look after the kids over the weekend. Holly's mother readily agreed. Then I picked up S and Barb from school. I went home with them to help pack their things and then took them to their grandparents for a 2-day pampering session. Around 5 o'clock, Holly called me and asked if she could stay and have a drink with her colleagues. To her surprise, I firmly told her to come home immediately because we needed to have an important conversation. Holly asked if I could wait, but I made it clear to her that if she wanted to stay married to me after the weekend, then she needed to come back. Confused, she asked what I was talking about, to which I replied that if she was not at home in the next 30 minutes, I would file for divorce. Holly immediately asked why I was talking about the divorce and what was going on. I insisted that she come home so we could discuss everything in person and then hung up. 26 minutes later, Holly appeared in the doorway and looked like she was crying. She asked about the divorce and the whereabouts of S and Barbara, to which I informed her that they were staying with her parents. Finally, I told her about her affair with Derek Turner. The shock on Holly's face was comparable to if I had physically punched her in the nose, and the impact of my words seemed to have the same effect. Her eyes widened, and she stammered before speaking. "I've never cheated on you," she said, her voice trembling. I took a chance and called it a bluff. "There are other forms of treason," I said firmly. "Just because you haven't slept with him yet doesn't mean you haven't cheated. Now tell me about last Saturday night." Holly froze, a look of panic on her face. "We didn't do anything but talk, I swear," she pleaded. I doubted that she had chosen Saturday, and I wondered why they needed to meet outside of work and have lunch together. "Was I being followed?" she asked, trying to steer the conversation in a different direction. But I couldn't let her change the subject. "Tell me about your meeting on Saturday," I insisted. She began to tell me the details. "I picked up Derek at his apartment. We went shopping and had lunch. I dropped him off at his house. He invited me in, but I refused and went home. No kissing, no hugging, no touching, no stroking," she explained. Holly said that he tried to kiss her when he got out of the car, but she turned her head, and he kissed her on the cheek. "I swear it was like that," she pleaded. I continued to insist, wondering about the need for a Saturday meeting when they already spent enough time together at work and at meals. "Why did you two need to meet on Saturday?" I asked suspiciously. Holly looked scared and replied, "We didn't do anything wrong, I promise. We were just shopping, and I bought a dress and something else." Deciding to get to the truth, I told her to stay put, and I went upstairs to investigate. I found a bag in her bedroom closet, half hidden behind hanging pantsuits. I gritted my teeth in annoyance when I found a small black dress, a pair of heels, and white silk underwear. I went down the stairs, furious. "What is it for?" I asked with disappointment in my voice. Holly covered her face with her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. She'd been crying since I left the room. "Derek made me buy a dress and heels in case he convinced me to go to a conference with him next month," she confessed. "If I don't go to the conference, when will you ask me out?" I couldn't help but feel cheated. "What were you going to do?" I asked, trying to understand the situation. "I do not know," she replied, her voice trembling. "But I swear I didn't have intimacy with him." Her words hung in the air, and I wondered what it meant to us. "Are you going to divorce me?" she asked, her voice full of fear. I paused, considering my answer. "It depends on the circumstances," I finally replied. "Do you want to stay married to me? Are you ready to put an end to this situation with Turner?" Her voice trembled as she replied, "Yes, I want to be your wife. I've never doubted it, and you shouldn't doubt it either. And yes, I never want to be alone with Derek again." Feeling a mixture of emotions, Holly got up from her chair and came over to me. She settled into my lap, pressing her head against my chest. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice full of remorse. "Please don't hate me." I felt anger rising in me, but I couldn't bring myself to push her away. "I don't hate you," I confessed, my voice filled with a mixture of pain and determination. "But things can change if you destroy our family." With those words hanging in the air, Holly and I spent the rest of the night and the next day discussing how we should move on and rebuild our lives. When we picked up the kids on Sunday morning, all my doubts that Holly loved our family were dispelled. Together, we decided to seek help from a marriage counselor. Holly had to deal with conflicting emotions, reconciling her love for our family with the temptation of a romantic relationship. It became clear that Derek Turner knew how to seduce women, and Holly told me about a case where he tried to manipulate her, hinting that I didn't care about her. I assured her that my refusal to ask about her recent purchase was due to suspicions I harbored, and I needed time to sort things out without losing my temper. I realized that I needed the advice of a psychologist to bring the truth to Holly and not destroy our family. In addition, we decided to take action against Turner by filing an official complaint with Holly's Human Resources Department. Despite Holly's initial resistance, she eventually agreed after reading notes about Turner's behavior and the sudden departure of a colleague. Our consultant supported this decision, and we were able to return the dress, shoes, and underwear that Turner had given to Holly. Although a part of me wanted to see her in that dress, I knew we had to focus on healing and rebuilding our relationship. Together with the help of a counselor and a determination to protect our family, we tried to strengthen our relationship and get through the pain caused by Turner's act. I couldn't look at them because Turner chose them. A year has passed since that weekend. Both Derek Turner and James Young were fired for reasons based on Holly's complaint. Moreover, after the HR director listened to the recordings, read Jake Sullivan's notes, and had a second conversation with him, neither of them received severance pay. They were just quickly put out the door. Holly heard that they threatened lawsuits but backed off after they were threatened with counterclaims. The letter from our lawyer talked about the lawsuits. Holly received a generous check from the company, and after she signed the statement, no further action was taken. We could have considered further proceedings, but Holly's company did the right thing by eliminating the violators and quickly resolving the problem. Our consultant played an important role in helping us deal with the problems. Holly was shocked when she found out the real reason for my first failed marriage. It hurt her when during our first session I told her that I was close to cheating on her. I made the decision to be honest with Holly because she needed to understand that she wasn't the only one who was tempted. I thought our marriage would be stronger if she didn't carry the burden of guilt alone. Although we didn't cross physical boundaries, the emotional boundaries we crossed were still devastating, though not unforgivable. I truly believe that Holly and I are happier now than we were in the first year of our marriage. Our children are doing well too. It is easier to raise children when both parents love each other and are actively involved in parenting. We have learned some important lessons. First, you should not seek emotional support from someone other than your spouse, especially if that person has reasons to create barriers between spouses. This can start with innocent dinners but often leads to more intimate situations. Secondly, if you find that you are engaged in an activity that you are ashamed to tell your spouse about, then it is most likely better to give it up altogether. Communication is the key to success. If you are experiencing difficulties in your marriage, open up and share them with your partner. I admit that this may not save every troubled marriage, but if your relationship is worth saving, make an effort to communicate. This is my point of view, and I believe it has value.